Virtual reality, or VR, is no longer considered to be a new thing. It has been available to consumers for almost 2 years now. That being said, it is still very much in the first phase of development. It matters not which VR headset you are thinking about getting, Oculus, Vive or PlayStation, as there are some things you need to know about and consider before buying, which affect each and every VR device. Welcome to SimUK. Today I am going to tell you some important things that you need to know about and consider before you buy into VR. Some of the issues and concerns I'm going to talk about you may already have heard about, but I suspect some of them you won't have. I have just picked up an Oculus Rift. This is my first VR device and currently the only one I have, although more are on the cards to allow for future direct comparison. For now though, the comments in this video mostly relate to all VR devices, but where necessary I will confirm what is specific to the Oculus Rift. So let's begin. My first point most of you will already know about, but for the benefit of those who don't, let's quickly discuss resolution. VR is still very much in its infancy. It was only 2 years ago when VR first released, and although a lot of improvements have arrived in recent months, there are still some limitations that you need to know about. The Oculus Rift is capped at 2160 by 1200 at 90Hz, which might sound impressive and is much higher than most monitors and some AAA games can currently match. But this is actually split for each eye, so the true resolution that you are seeing is going to be more like 1080 by 1200, not full HD resolution. And yes, it does notice, especially with older VR games or those with a lower development budget. At the tail end of 2017, some really impressive and stunning VR-focused games were released, proving that this issue can be less of an issue. It doesn't take long in a good VR game before you become fully immersed and stop focusing on what is and what isn't HD. The other issue here is the 90Hz refresh rate. In order to have a seamless and fully engaging VR experience, you need to be able to run a solid 90 FPS throughout. Oculus recommends a GTX 970 or above. I run a GTX 970, and for most games I manage a solid 90 FPS with the occasional drop. That's without adjusting the graphics settings at all and just running on default. There are some extremely demanding VR games though, like Dirt for example, which wasn't built with VR in mind but has had VR capability added later on. Demanding high-speed games like this tend to require a more powerful graphics card in order to maintain that 90 FPS without dropping all graphics and related settings to their lowest possible level. And even then, my GTX 970 struggles quite a bit. That brings me nicely onto my second point, games. It's pretty early on in terms of VR development, and developers are still learning their craft. Thankfully, some tremendous VR games are starting to flood the VR arena, and things are certainly starting to look really good. Regardless, quality VR games are less available and often come with a higher price tag than comparative non-VR games. Don't get me wrong though, there are an impressive plethora of free VR games and experiences available, which you simply do not find outside of the VR arena. This is not a criticism of VR gaming, by the way. My point here is that VR games tend to have less depth than a non-VR game because, well, let's face it, VR development is probably harder, more expensive, takes longer, and requires more specialist skills and equipment. Some games in VR are so good that they will keep you coming back again and again, but not all of them will, and there are less to pick from. So please keep that in mind before you buy. Next up is stuff that you will need. This section will definitely have some things that you might not have heard of before. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, buying a VR headset does not in any way mean your financial outlay has ended. On the contrary, to ensure that you have the best, safest and most issue-free VR experience, there are some important things that you have to consider in advance. You thought you could just plug the VR headset in, set it up, and then just play? Well, technically yes, you can do this, but pretty quickly you will realise that cable management is going to be a serious problem. Getting tangled up, stepping on the cable and moving further than the cable will allow are all serious issues that can have serious and expensive consequences. There are a number of ways that you can approach this, but the best current solution, until wireless VR arrives, is to have the cable from the headset suspended above you whilst it is attached to these springy key holder things. Don't laugh, it actually works pretty well, and all but eliminates the cable trip and break issue. I also highly recommend that you buy a decent HDMI and USB extension. The closer you are to the gaming area, the more cable you will have to work with and the more freedom you will have. Incidentally, on this point though, you cannot just have two extension cables, plug them in and off you go, because it just simply doesn't work. The USB extension needs to be powered and the HDMI extension needs to have, believe it or not, an HDMI to DVI conversion included in it, or you will lose either audio or visual on a regular basis. It's not straightforward, it really isn't. Another thing that you will definitely need is water. See, you were not expecting that one, were you? Water is essential when gaming in VR, especially if you are gaming for a long time, as the VR headset gets hot and sweaty. When playing in VR, you are likely to be moving around a lot. Water is an important thing. You will most definitely need that, and a fan is a good idea too. Do not wear hair products. Am I delivering upon that stuff you haven't heard statement yet? Anyway, hair products are sticky and can seriously ruin your very expensive and delicate lenses in your VR headset. Until Oculus fully release their Dash 2.0, people will continue to need to remove their headset in order to access their PC for whatever reason. Doing so can easily cause your lenses to become smudged and smeared with hair products. So don't be mean. Keep it clean. Once again, a seamless link to my next point. What the future will bring. Talk of the Oculus V2 is already on the lips of most VR enthusiasts, as is the Oculus Go and the release of a wireless VR attachment. My point is that VR is not cheap right now, and if you shell out for VR, how long will it be before you want to upgrade to the newer Full HD wireless version? It's definitely something to investigate and consider before you buy, and you don't want to regret having not saved your cash. Remember, I don't know exactly how long after I release this video that you will be watching it, so for you, the wireless variant with Full HD might be just around the corner. Incidentally, at the point of recording this, to buy a Vive you're looking at £600. To buy the full Oculus Rift equivalent is just £350. Now, that is a consideration worth making. If, on the other hand, you're considering the PS4 version of VR, then just know that there aren't very many games for PS4 at the point of making this video in comparison to the amount of games available for Oculus. I would wholeheartedly put my money on Oculus right now, but obviously it's up to you to do your homework and work out which one is best for you. Next up, PlaySpace. You might think this is just too obvious to be discussed, but there are some simple things that get overlooked and rarely, if ever, discussed. Width is more important than depth, in VR at least. Most VR games require you to move side to side considerably more than forwards and backwards. That's not to say forwards and backwards is not also a consideration. The recommended play space for Oculus is approximately 2 meters wide and 1.5 meters in depth. When it comes to play space, more is almost always better. The Oculus Rift now allows you to add an extra sensor and obtain full 360-degree occlusion, and that is known as room scale. Room scale is essentially the ability to have a large dedicated space for VR, allowing fluid and complete movement within the VR experience. Room scale was originally introduced by Vive, but Oculus now has a system in place that allows this, and PlayStation are working on one too. Yet another seamless link, obstructions. Vive already has a built-in camera on the headset, allowing the headset to show you real-life obstacles within your play area. For me, this is Vive's biggest plus point. If, like me, you are using an Oculus or PlayStation VR, then you won't have this. So this tip is definitely for you guys. When creating your safe play space, always give yourself a little bit of extra space. Don't go right up to the wall. Give yourself a little bit more warning before running into it. Then, once you have set out your safe play space, then for the love of God, don't drag something into that safe play space. You will forget it's there and you will trip over the flipping thing. Trust me, I know, I have done it. VR is so unbelievably immersive that it is so easy to just forget that in reality you're not a cyborg sent to retrieve rogue robots gone bad, and that really you're a chunky dude with a brick strapped to his head, jumping around in a room making all the neighbours nervous with your hollering and your shouting. That's when big accidents happen, and VR's biggest concern is injury. This is why I think Vive's ability to show your real-world obstructions is such an important point. Although it does make the headset heavier, and even this won't save you if you're diving to your left to take out Big Boy 21011 with a climactic kill shot and you have misjudged your real-world position in your play space. Yes, the Touch for Oculus arrived mid-2017. And to be honest, it was severely holding back the potential of the Oculus and allowed Vive to really and deservedly take the lead in VR sales. The reality is that in virtual reality, touch controllers are an absolute must. Unless, of course, you're only planning on using VR for driving sims, in which case, less so. But for the rest of us, and eventually even you, driving boy, will want to play a game that requires touch controls in order to get the full experience. And oh my goodness, what an experience it is. I recommend getting 2 different coloured wrist straps to help identify the left and the right controller. Trust me, it's just easier this way. I also heartily recommend that you always put on the straps. Always put on the straps. Unlike the Wii, and we've all seen the damage that can happen there when people don't wear the straps, in VR the experience is so real that you will eventually have a reaction to something in a game. Just the other day I was playing Dead and Buried when I picked up a stick of dynamite for the first time. I didn't know what it was at first, and then suddenly figured it out, and in some sort of panic I tried to chuck it over the barrier and my touch controller went with it. It's hard to fight a gun battle with just one hand. Finally, I have 2 warnings for you. Oculus Rift has a built-in mic, so be careful what you say when you're playing online. Google some of the ways that people have discovered this little nugget of information. My final point for this video is motion sickness. When it comes hard and fast, and for me at least, it can last for hours and cut your VR gaming session short immediately. Motion sickness can be so bad that some people have returned their VR headsets as a result. Oculus have a severity rating from mild to wild. I may have made those names up. But essentially, don't jump on a wild ride until you have tried something way less intense. Even driving a truck can induce this motion sickness, so be warned. That being said, and as a final statement for this video, before I bought my Oculus Rift, I tried a cheaper mobile phone VR device. This made me feel very nauseous almost every single time. I have only had one single incident with the Oculus, and that was after a solid 5 hours of gaming, and of course it does vary for each individual. And, in time, you can overcome it. That's pretty much all from me though, guys. I hope that this video has been informative, perhaps educational and even entertaining. Feel free to hit that like button, it makes me happy if you do, and of course subscribe if you want to see more videos about VR. My name is Mike, this is SimUK. Thank you very much for watching, until next time, goodbye.